Hi, welcome. This is The Overlay by Jason Gray. 5/16/2026, 6026 Analusis, 2336 GMT -6, #Winnipeg, #Manitoba, #Canada. There is something profoundly wrong with the modern human experience. Most people feel it. Very few can explain it. A strange pressure hangs over civilizations like static in the air before a storm. People feel exhausted without understanding why, disconnected while surrounded by millions, overstimulated yet emotionally numb, constantly informed yet internally lost. Humanity has more technology, more communication, more entertainment, more stimulation, and more digital connection than at any point in history, and yet something essential feels missing. Not physically, structurally. It feels as though reality itself has become distorted, artificial, overprocessed, emotionally synthetic, like something invisible has settled over the natural human experience and slowly disconnected people from themselves, from each other, and from the living world around them. This is what I call the overlay. Not a simulation in the simplistic science fiction sense, not fake reality, not holograms, not fantasy. The overlay is a perceptual architecture, a psychological, emotional, technological, and cultural layer placed over direct human experience, a distortion field, a manufactured mode of perception that gradually replaced authentic living with engineered distraction. Most people do not even realize it exists because they were born inside it. To them, constant noise feels normal. Constant anxiety feels normal. Constant stimulation feels normal. Constant performance feels normal. But none of this is natural to the human nervous system. Human beings were not designed to absorb thousands of emotional signals per day. They were not designed to compare themselves against millions of strangers. They were not designed to process endless catastrophe, outrage, advertising, political warfare, algorithmic manipulation, and identity performance every waking minute of their lives. Yet, that is exactly what the overlay does. It floods the human field continuously, not because the world is evil, but because systems optimized for attention eventually learn that fragmented people are easier to influence than coherent ones. That fragmentation became profitable. And once fragmentation became profitable, civilization slowly reorganized itself around maintaining it. The overlay does not function through obvious chains. It functions through saturation, through endless interruption, through psychological overload, through emotional exhaustion so constant that people lose the ability to hear themselves think. The overlay survives by keeping humanity externally focused at all times, always reacting, always consuming, always scrolling, always comparing, always outraged, always stimulated, always performing, never still, never inward, never fully present. The modern world has become so loud that many people no longer know the difference between their own thoughts and the noise they absorbed from the system surrounding them. This is one of the greatest tragedies of all. People have lost contact with their own internal signal. They no longer know what they truly feel because the overlay feeds them prepackaged emotional reactions every hour of the day. Fear cycles, identity cycles, political cycles, consumer cycles, validation cycles, outrage cycles. Even spirituality itself became absorbed into the overlay, packaged, branded, monetized for all the wrong reasons, turned into aesthetic performance rather than genuine transformation. The overlay does not care whether something is true. It only cares whether something captures attention, and over time humanity unconsciously adapted to survive inside this environment. People began shaping themselves according to visibility instead of authenticity. Identity became performance. Emotion became branding. Personality became marketing. Human beings slowly transformed into living advertisements for curated versions of themselves. That is why so many people now feel emotionally disconnected from their own lives, because the self they project outward is often no longer aligned with the self quietly suffering beneath the surface. The overlay rewards appearance over coherence. It rewards reaction over reflection. It rewards speed over depth. It rewards certainty over wisdom. It rewards stimulation over peace. It rewards performance over truth. And because the human nervous system was never designed to exist under these conditions permanently, civilization has entered a state of chronic psychological fragmentation. People are exhausted, not because life itself is meaningless, but because the overlay continuously drains human attention away from what is real. Look around carefully. Most conversations no longer carry depth. People interrupt silence instantly. Nobody sits with themselves anymore. Moments of stillness are immediately filled with screens, scrolling, noise, stimulation, or distraction. Even suffering is now consumed as content. Even grief becomes algorithmic. Even intimacy becomes performance. Even outrage becomes entertainment. The overlay converts human experience into consumable emotional cycles, and the more humanity lives inside those cycles, the weaker its connection becomes to the living lattice beneath it. The living lattice responds to coherence. The overlay produces fragmentation. The living lattice strengthens presence. The overlay rewards distraction. The living lattice amplifies authenticity. The overlay manufactures identity. The living lattice responds to essence. These two systems now exist simultaneously across the planet, one artificial, one organic, one extractive, one restorative, one built upon emotional destabilization, one built upon resonance. This is why so many people feel something inside themselves beginning to awaken, because despite all the noise, despite all the distraction, despite all the conditioning, the deeper human signal was never completely extinguished. It was buried. There is a difference, and now humanity is beginning to feel the tension between these two realities. People are beginning to notice that corporate language feels emotionally hollow. Influencers feel manufactured. Advertising feels invasive. Political theater feels scripted. Performative outrage feels repetitive. Artificial positivity feels empty. The overlay is weakening because human beings are slowly becoming capable of seeing the machinery itself. Once you see the machinery, it becomes difficult to fully submit to it again. That is why the modern world feels unstable right now. Not because humanity is collapsing, but because perception is shifting. People are beginning to recognize that much of what they called normal was actually sustained psychological conditioning, the constant pressure to produce, the pressure to compare, the pressure to optimize, the pressure to perform happiness, the pressure to remain visible, the pressure to maintain identity, the pressure to consume endlessly while feeling spiritually starved. The overlay taught humanity to search externally for what can only be restored internally. That is why nothing seems to satisfy people anymore. The nervous system cannot heal inside perpetual stimulation. The soul cannot breathe inside constant performance. The mind cannot stabilize inside endless fragmentation. Human beings require silence, stillness, nature, presence, real conversation, touch, meaning, purpose, depth. The overlay continuously redirects attention away from those things because coherent people become harder to manipulate. A person deeply connected to themselves does not react as predictably. They become less dependent on artificial validation, less emotionally programmable, less vulnerable to mass emotional contagion, less desperate for external identity reinforcement, and that changes everything. Because the overlay survives through unconscious participation. It requires people to feed it continuously with attention, fear, comparison, outrage, performance, and emotional exhaustion. The moment enough people stop feeding those cycles, the structure begins losing coherence. Not overnight, gradually, quietly, then suddenly. This is the part many people misunderstand. The collapse of the overlay is not necessarily catastrophic. It is psychological, emotional, perceptual, human beings slowly remembering what reality feels like beneath the distortion. The return of real conversation, the return of depth, the return of craftsmanship, the return of stillness, the return of communities, the return of human nervous systems no longer trapped inside permanent overload, the return of people seeing each other again instead of merely consuming each other. The overlay collapses when humanity begins valuing coherence more than stimulation, and that process has already begun. You can feel it everywhere now. People growing tired of fake language, tired of empty performance, tired of endless outrage, tired of algorithmic identity, tired of being manipulated emotionally every hour of the day, tired of living disconnected from themselves. The deeper signal is beginning to re-emerge, not loudly, quietly, like memory returning after a long illness, like static slowly clearing from a transmission, like a person waking up inside a room they forgot they were trapped inside. The living lattice beneath the overlay never disappeared. It remained active beneath a distortion the entire time, waiting, listening, responding, holding the memory of coherence while humanity wandered through fragmentation, and now more people are beginning to feel it, that subtle pull inward, the desire for authenticity, the craving for silence, the longing for depth, the exhaustion with artificiality, the intuition that something about modern life has become profoundly disconnected from what it means to be human. That intuition is not weakness, it is recognition. The overlay taught humanity to abandon itself. The living lattice is teaching humanity how to return, and once enough people remember the difference between the two, the entire structure of civilization begins to change. Jason Gray. Like, share, follow, subscribe. There's so much truth in this. There's so much truth in it, and I really hope that that it spreads, that the need for this type of connection and getting back to being real, I hope it spreads like wildfire, because it's exactly what is needed in order to wake up from what's been happening. So, all right, thank you. I will see you next time.